Then in a few minutes, we'll be back in our apartment and I will actually start the daf. Okay? Karen is the
Sue and Arnie Garlick and her family and murdered in the Holocaust. Cheryl shared her children and grandchildren. In memory of her uncle, founding member of the ERS, Dr. Israel Brook, Israel Ben Harab Akiva. Marsha Federbush family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Federbush, Uriel Pinchas Ben Rob Shin, Sharon's mom, Harry Friedman, Edelgale Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Sidell and Irving and Pearl Kaplan. Friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova Bat Yisrael Dov. Friends of Malka Levy, Malka Bat Yosef. Friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef Ben Chaim. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Sholem, Ben Yitzhak Halevi. Month of Learning sponsored by Haran and Mel Howard in memory of her father, Yusuf Ben Hirsch. B. Kaiser, Dov Ben Shmuel, Mordechai Nirenberg, Stanley Presser, in memory of his wife, Hayalea Bad Zev HaKohen. The Week of Learning was sponsored by Judy and Michael Poretsky, in memory of her mother. Today is 12th. Today the 12th? Yes. A day of learning by Roseanne Barr in memory of her grandmother, Carol Bat Sholem Leib. Michael and Judy Morgenstern in memory of his father, Yaakov, and that's it.
okay. We are because we're going through a tunnel. Okay. We finished up on the top of Lamed Aleph Hamud Aleph. Chotzeitz u'eino chotzeitz. Amalei kol de takun Rabbanan ke'ein deoraita takun.
Can they hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Are you sure? Wonderful.
Okay. All right. So
Hope you're not driving.
I know I'm not driving.
Oh, good,
Fortunately, I have an outstanding brother-in-law who's driving right now.
good.
Okay. So the Gemara picks up then as follows. Amarle Abaye Rav Yosef. So Abaye is questioning Rav Yosef about the issue of somebody partly entering the Azara. Okay? Remember the argument was, what about a Mitzora who could be waiting on the Nicanor steps? Okay? So that's what he says. Bia b'miktzad shma bia olo. Okay, is partial entry of their of only part of the body. Is that considered entry or not? Amarle, he said to him, Bohonot yochich, that the issue of the thumbs belonging to the Metzora are the proof. Shehein bi'a b'miktzat, okay, but they are partially inside because you're on the right ear, the right thumb and the right big toe. Okay, so this is the example. Batanya, and we have a Braita, Metzorah, Tovel v'omed b'shar Nikanor. Braita specifically says that the Metzorah immerses, and then he can stand on the Nikanor steps, okay, before entering the area, right? Ibailaho, so they asked, Mahu sheyaseh sakina rukav yishchot. What about the possibility then for him to do his shchita himself, the Metzorah, with let's say, a knife attached to a long pole and to do the shchita that way? Okay, doesn't that mean that at least he would partly be inside the Azara by doing it? Tibai leben zoma. Now the Gemara says you could raise that question according to the view of Ben Zoma, Tibai Rabbanan, but you could also raise that question in regards to the view of the rabbis, the Pligele, right? Because as they disagreed with Rabbi Yehuda, Tibai Ben Zoma, you could ask according to Ben Zoma why.
Are you getting our fix it?
Ad kan lo mechai Ben Zoma elei legevai. Okay, the Ben Zoma only required the immersion for entry inside, right, the courtyard. Aval levarai, but in regard to outside, lo, that's not the case. Odilma ate lamish shuche. Or perhaps the concern might be that he would be drawn in by this act of trying to reach, right, with the long pole and the knife attached inside. Gemara then continues. Tibai the Rabbanan, the Plige le de Rabbi Yehuda. Now you can raise the same question regarding the rabbi's approach to Rabbi Yehuda. Ad kan lo ka'amre Rabbanan hatta. Up to here, how do you say the rabbis say that he only required the immersion if he was actually going in to the Azara? Okay, that was being the point, right? The lo ka'avid avuda, because he was not doing any kind of actual sacrifice. Lo, therefore, no, you wouldn't require it of him. Oh, they'll take a look, but perhaps there's nobody is involved in any actual parts of the avoda, and therefore they still would require, according to Ben Zoma, right, the necessity to immerse in advance. Okay, we go now to a new topic, okay, as we proceed to try to define, okay, the more about these washing and immersions. Kamesh Tvilod, says the Gemara, right, it's referred back, I'm sorry, to the Mishnah. Kamesh Tvilod, the Asara Kiddushin Tovel. Okay, referring to the fact that there were 5 mikvah immersions and 10 washing of hands and feet. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Braita. Chamesh tefilot va'asara kiddushin tovel kohen gadol u'mekadesh bo bayom. Namely, on Yom Kippur, the kohen gadol had to immerse these 10 hand washings, immerse 5 times, and then 10 hand washings. Okay, chutz mirishona, he says, with the exception of the first one, shahita bachol, that was outside of the Azara area, in other words, really outside the temple precinct, al gabe shar hamayim, and that was by the water gate, right? Ubetzad lishka haita, and it was near, excuse me, the residence of the Kohen Gadol. Amar Abai, and Abai derives from this idea. Shma mina ein etem gavoa mikarka azara 23 amot. namely that we derive from this that the irrigation canal, let's use that way, the spring, which the water came into the temple area, okay, was such that at that point, okay, it must have been 23 cubits higher up than the level of the Azara itself. Now, the Mishnah wants to clarify. T'tnan, we learned elsewhere in the Mishnah. Kol haptachim shahayu sham gova'an esrim ama v'rachban eser ama. Namely, that all the entrances to the Azara, most had the same height, 20 cubits in height, and 10 cubits in width. Right? Chutz mishel ulam, with the exception of the, if you want to call it doorway or opening to the ulam itself, to the hechal area, right? Why? Batanya. And then another brighter tells us, Barachatz b'saro b'mayim, that the Kohen had to wash his flesh in water. Following that implied darshaning that pasuk, meaning since it said washing his flesh, his whole body, thus b'mei mikvah, okay, in a ritual bath. Kol b'saro, later another pasuk, mayim shekol gufu olam bahem. Okay, therefore that's what gives us the idea of the total immersions. The kamahain, and how much did they have to be? Ama al ama barom shalosh amot. Okay, that the area had to be ama wide, okay, and ama length, 1 ama, width of an ama, and 3 ama deep. Okay, which meant Mishi'aru Chachamim Mei Hamikvah Arba'in Sa'ah. And that's where they got the requirement that that much space would be equal to 40 seah. And thus that's the size that was determined for the mikvah. Okay? Now, so the Gemara then continues. But what about the fact that the Gemara is going to challenge and said, what about these gateways that we just said? V'ha'ika ama tikra v'ama ma'aziba. But there was in these gateways, there was certainly a additional height of at least a cubit, and probably at least what we might call a threshold, let's say, of a cubit, right? So how do we know that our determination earlier was right? Okay. So the Gemara continues, Sha'arim, the Beit HaMikdash, Kevan Deshisha Ninhu, B'mahashahu Avdelahu. Okay. So the cubit of the thickness of the ceiling, or that of the plaster, okay, that was on the floor, like a kind of threshold, okay, those are not going to be counted, right? Vaha, right? Mashu Abdallah, Vaha'ika He'ach Mashu. So how can you say that these aren't included? Kevan de la have amta lo chashivla. Because they very well could not always be that thick or that wide. Okay, they weren't included. Okay, now one more piece from this previous mission, Parsus linen sheet for tzniut was on the Beit HaParva. Maishnak Shabutz, why did they teach that it had to be from linen? Okay, Kedama Rav Kahana, said by Rav Kahana, okay, the following, Kadei Sheyakir She'avodat Hayom B'Big Day that was done according to this answer, that it would be a reminder to the Kohen Gadol that he got wear his golden garments. Here too. Why we say that? Another example should be done. And there's also an interesting side explanation to this point where they point out that since those gold garments are reminiscent of the golden calf, okay, we can't say that one that would bring the golden calf to defense. Okay, and that would be another explanation that some want to give why he couldn't had to wear the linen garments and not. Okay, gets us now to a new Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah is going to now focus and continue with the
Oh, yeah.
discussion of
We're losing you.
yeah, okay, I'm back. All right, I lost the connection here. All right. Evilo bigdei zahav v'levash b'kidei she'adav raglav. They brought him the golden garments, and then he put on the garments, and he washed his hands and legs. Evilo et tamid, and they brought him the daily the tamid offering. Karatzo. He then cut it, okay, killed it, slaughtered it. But remember, what he would do is not cut it, shecht it, so to speak, all the way through, but he would cut the majority of the two simanim, okay? And we'll see eventually why it says that he cut only the majority another time. Right?
Yep.
Evilo et
That's what Cab did also.
umeirek achar shchita al yado. And then what they did is that after he slaughtered it, another Kohen came to finish that,
Probably what it is,
and
I
he
just-
then would collect the blood. Okay? Right? So mirek et shchitato al yado, kibel et hadam uzrako. So the reason the Kohen Gadol only partially slaughtered it, cut it through, was that he would then be able to continue the avoda himself and then do the collect, collect the blood and then
Can you ask for 3 minutes to recap?
and then be prepared to sprinkle it. Okay, we're going to pause here for a moment while I get out of the car, and then we'll continue. Okay, guys.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Oh. Always nice spending your time with family.
Indeed.
Hold on.
More meaningful.
Honey, watch this.
you. Okay.
Welcome back.
Okay.
We get a mitzvah for walking Dalet Amos in Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah, sure.
Vicariously.
Virtually, virtually.
Yeah, virtual.
That's it.
Are you,
Okay,
is
so
Rabbi,
the
Rabbi Green, are you in Yerushalayim now?
I'm in Yerushalayim right now, yeah. Uh-huh. The cemetery was the one out in,
A question is the reason the Kohen Gadol only cuts makes part of the decision because he has to do, the Kohen Gadol has to do everything that on Yom Kippur. So he slaughters it, he makes sure it's to make sure that it's a kosher slaughter, and then he lets someone else finish it to preserve his strength.
well, I don't know if it was so that he could collect the blood.
Otherwise, the blood would be lost.
Well, otherwise, a certain amount of the blood, if he had cut through
Right.
the whole way, a certain
Right.
amount of the blood might have been lost.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to switch text. Okay.
No, you gotta shut. Okay.
Okay, so everybody's still with me, right?
Yes, but shut the other one because you're feeding back right now.
All right, Karen's taking care of that at the phone. Okay, so he continues. "Nichnas lahaktir ketoret shel shachar." He went to burn the morning incense. Now, at this point, I just want to point out, okay, notice that the Mishnah and the Gemara is going to be very concerned with a couple of items. Number one, if he does the slaughtering outside, now he has to come inside the ulam. But then he has to go back outside. And then he goes back inside. So what was the order that he's going to be doing if he has to sometimes be outside and sometimes be inside? So that's one question the Gemara is going to have to be dealing with us, for us, over the next couple of amudim.
Does he have to table? Does he have to table each time he comes in?
Each time, right, each time he changes garments,
Right.
he has to immerse tovel, right? And he has to also wash his hands and feet. Okay. So as we continue, the Mishnah tells us, okay, after he burns the incense, which remember was on the Mizbeach inside, okay, then Uleitei v'tanerot, then he cleans up the lamps right? The candelabra, but he doesn't do all of them. He does all but 2. So 5 he cleans out. Okay. Now then, ulahakriv et harosh ve'et ha'evarim ve'hachavitim. So then he goes back out, right? And then he has to sacrifice the head and the specific limbs, and he has to bring the griddle cakes that are his specific requirement. Remember, he has griddle cakes that he brings in the morning, Tommy, and griddle cakes that he brings for the afternoon, Tommy. Okay. The etayayin, and then he does the wine libation. So the Mishnah continues, Ketoret shel shachar haita kreva ben dam la'evarim. This would seem to imply that the morning incense was done, okay, at such a time between the receiving and the sprinkling of the blood and the burning of the limbs. Shel bein ha'arbayim, that the incense, right, in the afternoon, for the afternoon tamid, bein evarim v'nesachim, was done between the limbs and the offering the limbs on the altar outside the mizbeach and the wine libations. Finally, the Mishnah finishes, Im haya kohen gadol zaken o istanis, if the kohen gadol was elderly, let's say weak, okay, or he had a delicate stomach, let's say, as we might say, right? Mechamin lo chamin umetalim letoch hatzonein kedei shetafig tzinata. They would actually heat up water for him on Yom Kippur and pour that into the water in the ritual bath, in the mikveh. That might be cold water, so he would not be uncomfortable. Now, Gemara here is going to continue, okay? And we're going to see in a moment what some of this discussion is, okay? All right. Amaruha Rabbanan Kami de Rav Papa. The rabbis, a number of sages, discussed this with Rav Papa. What's his response? Ha, delo ke Rabbi Meir. This Mishnah cannot be according to the view of Rabbi Meir, argues Rav Papa. The Rabbi Meir, because if it were edited, let's say, by Rabbi Meir, Kevan da Amar, since Rabbi Meir holds the following: Trei kedushe al bisha al vidlo. That Rabbi Meir argues that the Kohen Gadol had to perform 2 hand washings and feet washings. Okay? Trei kedushe ali bisha avid, each time that he had to change garments. Hachanami be'avid trei kedushe alabisha. Here too, he would need to do 2 washings, 2 hand and feet washings before changing garments. Okay? But the Mishnah, if we go back and look at it very quickly, all it tells us was Hevilo bigdei zahav lavash v'kidesh yadav v'raglav. That they brought him the garments, the golden garments, and afterwards he washed hands and feet. It would seem perhaps that Rabbi Meir is arguing he has to wash before he puts them on, hands and feet, and then again he puts them on and then washes hands and feet again afterwards. That would seem to be the view of Rabbi Meir. So what happens? Rav Papa now comes back. Amar laho Rav Papa, and he said to them, Bein l'Rabbanan, bein l'Rabbi Meir, regardless to the opinion of Rabbi Meir or the opinion of the rabbis. Right? What happens? He said, Chad afshita devigdei kodesh. There was one, we'll call it sanctification, which means hand and feet washing. Okay? When he took off the garments, Vichad alavisha, and one hand washing, feet washing, when he puts on garments. Bahacha, bahaka miflagei. And so Rav Papa is telling us this is what the arguments was between the rabbis and Rabbi Meir. The pasuk says, "Upashat v'rachatz v'lavash." He shall remove the linen garments he put on when he entered the sanctuary and leave them there, and he shall wash his flesh in water in a sacred place, and then he shall put on his garments. So those are the psukim they're referring to. Now notice, okay, that the two psukim only make reference to the word wash a single time. Okay? Now, Rabbi Meir Savar, Makish Pshita Lelavisha. Rabbi Meir argues and is of the opinion that there's an association, a connection between removing garments, excuse me, and putting on new garments. Lovesh va'achar malavisha, the same way that putting on garments, lovesh va'achar kach mekadesh, that he puts them on and afterwards washes, af pshita. So likewise, removing garments, poshet v'achar kach mekadesh, he removes the garments and then also washes hands and feet. So that's Rabbi Meir's view. Continues the Gemara. Okay. For Rabbanan Savre, and the rabbis, however, have the following position. This is their view. Makish pshita lelavisha. They do make an association between removing garments and putting garments on. Malavisha, whereas when he's dressed, keshehu lavush mekadesh, when he's dressed, he washes hands and feet. Af pshita. So when he removes garments, keshehu lavush mekadesh, when he's dressed, and I'm going to say again, that's when he washes hands and feet. Okay? So, according to Koren, the first time the high priest dons the priestly garments on Yom Kippur, he does not require two sanctifications because he's not removing any other garments. Now, Amrule Rabbanan, the Rav Papa. The sages then, the rabbi said to Rav Papa.
Excuse me, Rabbi Green, doesn't
Yes.
say that when it says Apshita Kehu Levush Mekadesh, that he washes just before he takes off the old garments, and then he washes again when he puts on the new garments.
That's a good question, Zev. It seemed to me that he was would wash when he has garments on.
Yes, so that's why he washes before he takes off the old one, so he still has them on.
Right. Yes, but my problem with that is that he already washed hands and feet when he put those garments initially put them on. So why should he have to wash hands and feet twice while he's wearing the same garment?
I don't know, because he's ready to take them off. I'm not sure.
Now, if you're following, if you're holding like Rabbi Meir, I could accept that view. Okay? That you'd have to wash when you put on and you wash before you take off, because you're going to do, okay? But if you're holding like the rabbis, that wouldn't work. Okay? So let's continue for a moment to see if the next piece of Gemara clarifies. Amrule, Rabbanan Rav Papa. So the rabbi said to Rav Papa, Umi matzet amrat hachi. Okay, are you sure that this is what Rabbi Meir really, can you say that this is what Rabbi Meir was really his intention, what his view was? Vahatanya, but wasn't it taught elsewhere in a bright? Parsu sadin shel butz beino levein ha'am. That they spread this linen curtain, sheet, right, between the Kohen Gadol, he said, and the people. Pashat. He then removed his clothes, v'yarad, and then went down, in other words, went into the mikveh, v'taval, and immersed. Allah came up, v'nistapeg, and then dried himself off. Heviu lo bigdei zahav v'lavash. They brought him then the golden garments, and then he got dressed. V'kidesh yadav v'raglav. And then he washed his hands and his feet, which would seem to imply from the Mishnah or this Braita that he only washed hands and feet after he put on, let's say, new or a fresh set of garments. Now, what would Rabbi Meir answer to this part of this challenge of this part of the Braita, let's say? Rabbi Meir Omer, Pashat v'kidesh yadav v'raglav, that he undressed and then washed his hands and feet. V'yarad v'taval, then he went down, then immersed. Allah, then he came up, v'nistapeg, and then dry himself off. V'heviu lo bigdei zahav v'lavash. Then they brought him the golden garments, and then put them on. V'kidesh yadav v'raglav, and then washed his hands and feet again. So, what would they answer Rabbi Meir in his excuse, in his explanation? Amar laho, they would send him, eat Tanya. But if the Braita taught, and in this case, we're saying that this was actually the words of the Mishnah. If this is how it taught it, this is how it, so to speak, had to be. That was how it was taught. Okay? Now, there could be that if you were only citing the Braita, you might argue, and Rabbi Meir could respond, well, not everybody knows all the Braitot. Okay? And so therefore, who's to say that this Braita is a correct Braita, even though it seems to parallel our Mishnah? Okay. So you can't necessarily argue just because this Braita was taught this way, that is the only way. Okay? Right? So that's the point. Right? Now, what happens? The Gemara has to respond. Bishlam the Rabbi Meir. Okay? That's understandable according to the view of Rabbi Meir. Hainu the Mishkachat la Asara Kiddushin. Why? Because we see as we go over to the top of Lamed Bet Amud Aleph just briefly, right? That it initially said that there were going to be 10 sanctifications, 10 hand washings, right? So they would accompany each of the 5 tevilot that the Kohen Gadol did. Ela the Rabbanan, but according to the rabbis, Tish Ahavu, there would seem to have been only 9 sanctifications, 9 hand and feet washings. Amri lach Rabbanan, and the rabbis, however, would therefore respond and give the following answer. Kiddusha Batra, the last one of the hand, feet washings, right? Ki pashat bigdei kodesh, v'lavesh bigdei chol. Okay, it's when he took off his sanctified garments and put on his, let's say, common everyday garments. Aviv lehatam. That's what he would, when they would do it. And that's how they would get the last of the 10th sanctification. Okay, so we're going to stop there, okay, for today. Okay, I appreciate, guys, your putting up with my back and forth.